advertising is one of the fastest and most powerful ways to grow any business and to reach more new and potential customers than you ever thought possible. And this is what makes the thought of running ads so appealing to business owners and entrepreneurs and marketers and startups. Get it right and you can quickly turn $1 into 2 or 5 or 10 or even more, which makes advertising the closest thing to an automatic money-making machine that there is. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to the hyper-competitive and cutthroat world of advertising. And a single mistake can cost you hundreds, thousands, even millions of dollars in wasted ad spend and lost sales. And that's why today I'm gonna walk you through 42 different advertising strategies, tactics, and techniques from 42 of my all-time favorite books on advertising. But this video isn't just about theory taken from books. It's about real-world application and showing you proven, battle-tested strategies that have proven themselves to be both powerful and incredibly profitable. Having spent more than $70 million over the past 10 years, these are the advertising strategies and techniques that I think you really need to understand. So let's get things started with the classics, and I'll progressively dive deeper into more underground and more secret advertising strategies that you probably haven't heard of before. These could just be the key to giving you a significant competitive advantage. All right, so the very first book is Ogilvy on advertising. Now, if you're not already familiar, David Ogilvy is widely considered one of the main fathers of advertising, even though he wasn't the first one to ever run an ad, and he kind of came into advertising around a time that it had already been relatively well established. He's the one that they base a lot of the the Mad Men era off of, the kind of classic quintessential do what I want. I mean, the cover of the book says, I hate rules. It kind of sums it up. Whatever the case, this book, just like most things written by David Ogilvy, are just absolutely packed with gems, but there's a couple spots that I've got flagged. The main one here being the man in the Hathaway shirt. This is a classic ad, and it basically goes over kind of creating a point of differentiation, a point of uniqueness. We're going to talk about that more later, but that's one of the biggest takeaways here, is that you've got to be interesting. You've got to think about things strategically to find that position, to find that area where you're going to be able to offer something just a little bit different that people may not have heard before. There's another cool section here called Advertising for Good Causes. I like this section as well because for anyone that's been involved in advertising for any length of time, you know that it gets kind of a bad rap in the world of just selling things to people that they don't really need or don't really want. So he challenges that by giving you some good advice on how to fix that. Next up, we've got advertising headlines that make you rich. It's funny, referencing Ogilvy first, one thing that he said is that when you write your headline, you've spent 80 cents of your dollar, essentially meaning that the headline is responsible for around 80% of the success of your ad. So on that note, well, it's probably no better book to give you as a reference than this guy right here. It's loaded with all kinds of different examples and situations. It gives you different industries. Essentially, if you have trouble writing headlines or titles for your blogs, for your social media posts, for your videos, for your sales letters, this book can help. It's kind of like a go-to resource that I keep around all the time. Anytime that I reach some kind of a mental block and I can't think of what to do next, I kind of just thumb through here, pick the first thing. And for example, we've got chapter 14, proven headline, what's new in summer sandwiches? That's the most random page ever to open to. But there's variations for specific businesses, including bicycle shops and daycare centers and office rentals and financial planners and tour bus companies. So for example, if we were doing like copier sales, they'd say, what's new in office copiers? Now, it might sound relatively simple, just that headline. However, it's leveraging a couple important principles, being kind of that newness, that curiosity factor, the element of specificity and relevance to the business that it's pertaining to. So again, a lot of good gems in this guy here. Number 3 on the list is Purple Cow by Seth Godin. This is perhaps one of the most powerful and influential marketing books that I've ever read. It's the first one that I read when I was getting more serious into marketing and trying to understand kind of the concepts behind it, what makes people tick, why do people do what they do. Absolutely amazing book. I always keep multiple copies around my office and home. I think I've got some in my car and in my bags and all of that just so I can give to people. The concept of this one is about being remarkable. Remarkable being worth making a remark about. So is your business, is your offer, is your ad worthy of someone talking about, of sharing? See, we can't be boring anymore. There's a great expression that says, if you're boring, you're broke. This seeks to fix it. If you haven't read it before, highly recommended. I can't even count how many times I've read it. Dozens and dozens. For Words That Change Minds is another amazing book. Essentially, it kind of is what it sounds like. It's a bit thicker and a little bit heavier. However, there's some powerful concepts in here about the way that you speak, the way that you write, the way that you compose your ad or your marketing in general, essentially by diving a little bit deeper into psychology and why people do what they do, but also giving you practical and actionable tips on how to reframe your ad so that it's relevant to the kind of customer, the kind of client that you're trying to get. So there's a great section in here on essentially the carrot or the stick. Should you use fear-based or aspirational-based language? Should you try to drive someone towards something that they want or away from something that they don't want? So they call this mainly toward or away from language. And what you'll find is that there's a pretty even split of people that either want to move towards something or people that want to move away from something. And if you can identify the biggest driver of your market, whether they're trying to escape some kind of pain or attain some kind of pleasure, naturally there's an overlap of both, but there is going to be a dominant factor. And if you can incorporate that into your ads, your conversions will rise. Exactly what to say. Very powerful little book, incredibly useful, very small, very quick read, but it's just loaded with powerful magic words that allow you to immediately sort of influence and persuade someone without being overly manipulative. I mean, this is just the natural way that our brains register certain things and they form visualizations in our minds. A few more books on that topic as well. But for example, one of my favorites here is this. You have 3 options. I love this. I use this all the time in sales and marketing. And essentially what you're doing by giving someone 3 options is you're not forcing something on them. You're not saying this is what you have to do. You're saying essentially the way that I see it, you've got 3 options. You can take this path over here, which is kind of what you've always been doing, and you'll get the same thing that you have. Option 2 is you could do nothing and just essentially hope that things get better, but how's that working out? Or option 3, you could take a look at what we have to offer here and maybe you'll find it beneficial. Of course, you can stack that by adding even more magical words as well as some other things that we'll talk about. But great book. And while we're kind of heading on this theme of words right now, this is another good one. This is 10 Stories That Great Leaders Tell. This is good because the key to a persuasive and an effective ad often comes down to the story that you're telling and your ability to communicate it clearly. But you may not know what story should you tell and how should you structure it. And this book is going to give you a couple good examples of that. So for example, I mean, even the table of contents is going to show you, we can tell a founding story of where things came from. We can talk about why we need to change and where we're going. We can talk about strategic. We can talk about values. We can talk about customer stories by sharing testimonials. Essentially, if you don't know what to say or how to say it or how to structure things, this is going to help. No list that involved different kinds of advertising strategies would be complete without The Ultimate Sales Letter by Dan Kennedy. Pretty much anything Dan Kennedy has to write and has to sort of create is worth consuming and worth incorporating into your advertising and your overall marketing strategy. What I like about this is that it gives you a structure for how you want to go about essentially composing your ad. Now, he's writing into the context of a sales letter, but you could strip it down and condense it to be a social media ad or some other kind of post, or you could let it be a long form sales letter, because this is going to cover all the boxes. We'll talk about guarantees and risk reversals. It'll go through headlines and bullet points and things like that. However, the other thing that I quite like is it goes into a few details. I wonder if you're gonna be able to see this well enough on kind of on formatting and on how to structure your ad so that it's also visually appealing. Now, this is primarily on copywriting and the words that you're going to use, but it's important the way that you structure your headline and the fonts that you use. And if you use graphic elements, if you have arrows pointing places, if you have color or underlines or things like that, there's all of these different nuanced details that you can add to an ad in order to increase your conversions with it. But regardless, if you don't know how to write a sales letter, this is a good one to study. All right, moving right along with what I believe is one of the classics, and this is Tested Advertising Methods by John Caples, the 5th edition in this case, but the 1st edition I believe was published in 1932. Once you understand the fundamentals and the principles and kind of those foundational elements that make up the core of advertising and marketing strategy, the only thing that changes are the tactics and the tools and the platforms where we apply these. So essentially, once you understand the psychology of why people buy and why they don't, All you need to do is modify your approach so that it fits with Facebook or Instagram or Google Ads or TikTok or whatever it is. Now, like basically every book we're talking about, this one is absolutely loaded. However, there's a section that I did want to share with you in chapter 13, which is 32 ways to get more inquiries from your advertising. And he essentially goes through a ton of different ones. I'm going to just read you a few so this video doesn't balloon into an 8-hour one, but essentially mention the offer in the headline. That part is important to me. That's tip number 1 from 1932. Sounds obvious, right? Mention the offer in the headline, but you'd be amazed at how many ads I take a look at that are prioritizing cleverness over clarity. They're trying to be overly creative and interesting, and they're losing people rather than just saying, we have this, you can get it, here's what it looks like, etc. Next, emphasize the word free if you can. So if you have anything free, some kind of lead magnet or download or anything like that at the beginning of your funnel, obviously mention that. Mention the offer in a subhead again, show a picture or a booklet of the sample. Those are all good. This is the reason that specifically when it comes to e-commerce products, time and time again, we find that the best ads almost always have a picture of whatever it is that we're selling. It's not a lifestyle photo. It's not a version of success. It's like literally an image of the thing. The same thing kind of goes when we're giving away a free download or a PDF or a guide. We may put it on the ad or we may put it on the landing page where someone goes, but more often than not, we have a visual representation of what they're going to get. So tested advertising methods, good book. All right, another classic from that same era, the Robert Collier letter book. This one was written in 1931. This is another absolute gem of a book. It's a bit of a denser read as well. The English is, again, slightly old, being from 1931, but it's powerful. It's like a master course on copywriting, and any great advertiser knows that the foundation for successful advertising comes from successful copywriting. That's the words we're going to use. A couple things that are important here. Number 1 is it's mentioned right away in the beginning of it that the key to successful ads is the bait, right? This is about being relevant and specific to the market that you're trying to appeal to, but there's another cool gem in here as well, about halfway through, that I made sure to highlight and reference. He said, but while the edition lasts, you can see these books, just your name and address on the enclosed card are all that's necessary. There's only one condition. Your card must be mailed right away. Essentially, we have one of these available. If you don't get it now, it's gone forever. Scarcity in advertising is nothing new, and it is incredibly powerful to incorporate. If you don't give somebody a reason to act now, they're going to put it off until tomorrow. And as you and I both know, tomorrow never comes. So your ad just simply won't deliver. Great book, again, a little bit denser. So next book here is Scientific Advertising by Claude Hopkins. This guy was written even earlier in 1923. Absolutely phenomenal book. You got some cool little pictures and references from the good old days. But this goes through, again, many of the principles that have stood the test of time. The fact is, if you're getting your advertising knowledge today from most social media sites, from people that have only been doing this for a few years, you're missing out on all of the greats that have come before, the ones that have spent the tens, the hundreds, the billions of dollars putting this into practice, who devoted their lives to this almighty and noble craft of advertising. But the point is, there's absolute gems in here. Now, people can be coaxed, but not driven. Whatever they do to please themselves. Many fewer mistakes would be made in advertising if these facts were never forgotten. Essentially, and we're going to cover this again because it's such an important point, is that we don't make people do stuff. We can't force them to want something or to buy something or to do something. We can encourage them, we can support them, we can make it easy for them. But what we're really trying to do is tap into drives and desires and wants and needs that they already have. When our ad becomes too focused on us and our sort of the features and all of the things that we think are important about it, and less about the drives that someone has, that's when things fail. But when you can keep things focused on your client and customer, and you can make sure that all you're really doing is tapping into a natural drive they have, well, your conversion rates go up. All right, the next book is The Advertising Solution. Now, of all of the people that we just talked about, we went over Robert Collier, we talked about Claude Hopkins. I don't think we touched John Caples on that yet. We obviously went over David Ogilvy, Gary Halbert, we're going to talk about in a bit, as well as Eugene Schwartz. But the point is, this book takes all of those greats and it sums up some of their lessons in here. So if the thought of going through literature from 1920s and 1930s is a little bit tedious and overwhelming, this book will pretty much provide a decent summary. And then you can decide on whether you want to dive in deeper into some of the lessons. However, there's a point here and a very important lesson that I think is absolutely essential. This is from Claude Hopkins, and it says, brilliant writing has no place in advertising. Again, this kind of echoes the previous point of you want to focus on clarity over creativity. If your advertising starts to sound a little too wordy, you're using fancy terms, you've done too much, you've gone too far. You don't want to treat your customers and your audience as they're dumb, but you want to do the heavy mental lifting for them. You want to make things as clear and as concise as possible. The average person is subjected to around 5,000 ads a day in marketing messages. That's insane. So you've got to cut through the noise and you've got to be crystal clear. There's an app that I use. I'm not sure if it's available on PC, just for Mac. It's called the Hemingway app, and it enables you to take the ad that you've written, you plug it in there, and it'll show you what grade level your ad is written for. Now, when I'm writing sort of general copy, I try to keep it at a grade 6 level or below. If I'm writing an ad that I need to make sales for and I'm putting a lot of money behind it, I'll make sure that guy is at like grade 4 level or below. So there's not too many adjectives and adverbs and confusing things. It's very clear. All right, so the next technique, next strategy that I want to share with you comes from this book here, Reality in Advertising by Russell Reeves. This is also an old established kind of classic in the field of advertising, considered by many to be kind of a core staple, something mandatory reading essentially if you want to really understand the advertising game. But there's something in here that I quite like, and it is the vampire claim. Essentially, what a vampire claim is when you have your ad and you've made a really good, compelling case for it. You've got your USP, everything's dialed in and everything's solid, and then you add a secondary claim. Essentially, what ends up happening is this secondary claim is called a vampire claim because it starts to suck away some of the power of your main claim, making it less important and less memorable. So here's what he says. Be cautious in the course of adding secondary claims that a distraction claim does not suddenly crystallize, i.e. a second claim which sucks power away from your USP. Very important, because this sort of goes back to direct marketing 101, where you want to have one clear, compelling call to action. You don't want to send people a million different places. Well, the same thing goes with your ad. You want that main USP to really shine. You don't want to water it down and start throwing all kinds of other things into the mix. What's fascinating about this is also a powerful negotiation tactic, because what often ends up happening in negotiations is people will make their strongest point and then they'll add all kinds of other random fluffy things that people are easily able to pick apart and destroy in that. So again, focus on your powerful, most important element, really build that thing up and be careful about how many other elements you're introducing to your ad. All right, next let's get a little bit more tactical by diving into some of the structure and the elements of an ad and what really makes a compelling ad. And for that book, well, we've got the Adweek Copywriting Handbook by Sugarman. This is another great book. I like this one because it kind of walks you through a few different examples of how to structure things and how to lay them out. Specifically, depending on what edition you have, you can find this one on page 96. And essentially what it does is it walks you through a bit of a chart starting at the top. I'll read this out for you so you don't have to squint too much. But it's how you're going to structure your argument, because you can't just come out with an ad and say, we have this thing and it's the best, etc., etc. Depending on the space that you have available to you, you're often better to present a compelling argument, starting with your headline and making sure your offer's clear and putting in your subhead and so on. So for example, he starts with interest and excitement. This is the hook. Everybody in ads knows this. We need to grab someone's attention and draw them in, or they're just going to move on. Then we build some drama in. We go over differentiation and why it's different. We talk about all of the things that it is applicable to. We talk about its unique features. We go into price justifications, like why this is a good decision, why you would be smarter, better, cooler to go and do this. We talk about how this is going to serve you not just now, but in the future. We talk about any kinds of service that comes with it, and then we make the CTA at the end to ask for the order. That's just one tiny fraction of what's in here, but the important technique here is to make sure that your argument, your ad, your copy is following a logical persuasion path that's guiding someone from where they are now to where they need to go, which is ultimately to make that purchase. All right, on the topic of copy, the next technique here is to try to use visual representations to try to show rather than just tell. Great book here. Again, this one's a little bit heavy and a little bit thick. It's called The Copybook, how some of the best advertising writers in the world write their advertising. Very clear, very, very compelling subject for someone that's interested in advertising. However, what I want to draw your attention to here is this ad here by Dove. We'll see if we can do a nice zoom in there. make sure we got some light on it. But what you can see is it's kind of visually representing the degree of alkalinity from household cleansers all the way down to distilled water. And it's showing you very clearly using a litmus strip, essentially that little yellow and blue thing down there, on how acidic something is, how damaging it is to your face. And it's making the argument that, hey, do you really want to use like battery acid and household cleaner to wash your face, or do you want to use this more natural thing? It's one thing to say it, right? It's one thing to be like, don't put battery acid on your face, use water. It's another thing entirely to show a bottle of different household cleaners and to sort of map them out on a spectrum. It allows you to communicate the message almost instantly rather than having to make that argument. Of course, you're going to want to back it up later and provide the facts and the research and the case studies and the testimonials and all of that, but the power of an image goes a really long way. All right, so the next strategy, the next technique to really create more effective and profitable ads, this one's a tough one, right? This is one that not a lot of people want to hear, but it's probably one of the more important lessons learned. This is the Copywriter's Handbook by Robert W. Bly, Bob Bly. Great book. He also has some interesting ones on writing offers that are a little beyond the scope of this one, but worth checking into as well. But essentially, what he says here is that when you're getting ready to write your ad, intensive research gives you the edge. If you want to know the difference between a really successful advertiser and copywriter and someone who's kind of struggling, it has to do with a deep, intimate, almost frightening level of knowledge about whatever product or service or offer that they're selling. There's an incredible amount of research that goes into not just the product or service, but also the customers and their pains and how the product or service is able to bridge the gap and move a client or customer away from all the bad stuff that they're experiencing right now and towards the promised land where they want to get to. There's no shortcut for this. I wish there was. After a decade of doing this, I truly wish there was a faster way, but it really comes down to kind of grit and a bit of blood, sweat, and tears, and putting in the hours to read everything that you can get your hands on. For example, if I'm writing an important ad for a new client in a company in a new industry that I don't have any experience with, I'll go to Amazon, I'll talk to friends, I'll buy every book that I can find on the subject, I'll read as many as I possibly can, I'll read the reviews and the descriptions, I'll watch the videos, and I'll try to embody it as much as possible. The higher the ad spend and the higher the stakes, the more time and research that you need to put into your craft. The reason that advertising is so powerful and the reason that we're able to often put in $1 and get out 10 or 100 or many times more is often always related to the amount of effort that went into it. All right, next I've got a bit of a hidden gem to share with you. If you haven't heard of this before, you haven't read this before, it is a really interesting book. It's by Rory Sutherland. It's called Alchemy, and essentially the dark art and curious science of creating magic in brands, business, and life. What's really interesting about Rory Sutherland and about his approach to advertising and to creating things is that it's often done by simply repositioning the way that people think about things. So some of the examples that he gives in this book that I think are incredibly relevant and valuable to move over is that, I'll forget the exact statistics, but essentially the rail system in the UK was looking at making the trains a little bit faster. And they're like, look, we can shave off, I don't know, say 20 minutes from London to Manchester, and it'll cost like £1 billion or some ridiculous amount of money. And what Rory said is we can actually increase customer satisfaction simply by making the train ride more enjoyable. That's it. We don't need to spend £1 billion and shave 20 minutes off. What people would prefer would be to have, say, faster Wi-Fi, or maybe in train service, maybe better seating, maybe they wouldn't need to show up so early, maybe they could have this or that, or all of these things that cost significantly less than £1 billion. So essentially what you're able to do is reposition the way that your message or offer is being delivered to dramatically increase the perceived value of it. And that's really it. It's like the key to charging higher prices and to getting better results with your ads is to increase the perceived value so that it becomes significantly more desirable than the price someone is going to have to pay in order to achieve it. So, awesome book. A little more psychologically based. We've got some more of those though, if that's your thing. But next, let's talk about cashvertising. All right, cashvertising. This one is another favorite. I say this about all the books. These really are some of my favorite books, and they're just so full of valuable information, again, that you're going to be able to apply and see some pretty big changes in the results that you're getting. Now, the section that I chose to highlight here has again to do with headlines. We talked about it on Headlines That Will Make You Rich. We talked about it quickly when we referenced Ogilvy and the importance of the headline. But I found this section really interesting because they they have a graph on how many words in the headline and then how many people read the entire headline. So I can show you here. We'll see if any of this works at all, but you'll find the little graph right there. And essentially, if you've got up to 3 words, then 87.3% of people read it. If you have 4 to 6 words, 86%, 7 to 9, 84%, 10 to 12, 82.5%, and 13 words plus, only 77.9%. Here's why this is interesting. A shorter headline is usually better, but you have to make sure that it is relevant enough and specific enough that you're able to communicate the message. So I get asked this all the time. How long should my headline be? Is this too long? Is this too short, etc.? The point is that it's going to be different depending on your offer, your business, your market, your industry, who you're trying to serve, etc. It needs to be as long as it needs to be, but if you can err on the shorter side, if you're able to take your headline and make it shorter and more concise, that's going to be better. Depending on the kind of ad that I'm writing, I'll often write out 10, 12, 15, 20 different headlines, and I'll try to find ways to make it as clear and compelling as possible in the shortest amount of time and space. Really, really valuable. Increase your click-through rates and your conversion rates. All right, back on the topic of important words, the next thing is to make sure that you're using the right trigger words for your market. So this is a cool book, The Big Book of Words That Sell, another book by Robert W. Bly, Bob Bly there. Really cool book. What it's done is it literally has 1,200 different words and phrases that every salesperson and marketer should know and use. So you could literally skim to any page and you'll find a whole bunch of different phrases and things that you want to incorporate. Don't forget and enjoy. Do you recognize? Do you know? Do you have XYZ on your mind? Fast, faster, fastest, etc. However, what I wanted to point out was this section on warnings and alerts. Because what you're going to find is, like we talked about earlier, how people are either trying to move away from something or towards something. If you can find the people that are trying to move away from something and you incorporate some of these words, you'll find it captures their attention a little bit more. It gets them to just sort of perk up and their brain fires in. So could be burst, like the bubble's about to burst, could be danger or dangerous. There's disaster, there's don't be fooled, which is a classic because you're essentially making sure that you're preying on someone's desire for status. Preying's a terrible word. You're tapping into someone's desire for status by showing, hey, you don't want to get fooled by this. You can arm yourself with the knowledge to avoid it. Don't let this happen. There's hidden dangers in uncertain times. No one's expecting, on the verge, on the way, plague, read this before, da-da-da. You see that a lot. Make sure to do this before this, or read this before buying this, or watch this before doing this. A very, very common tactic on YouTube. Watch this review before buying this kind of camera or whatever it is. The point is, very valuable. It's sort of like a shortcut to a dictionary that you don't have to go through the entire dictionary looking for power words. They've kind of gone and outlined some of them for you. That's what a lot of these books do have in common. And then when you start going through these books and you start internalizing them, they start to have the language and the way that they write and the way that they speak starts to become sort of second nature, so that it rolls off your tongue a little bit easier. You find that your fingers move faster over the keyboard. You're able to pull open the metaphors and the analogies and all of the stories that you need because they're stored in after having consumed so much of this incredibly valuable content. All right, next up we've got, I don't even know what we've got. We got a stack to get through here. Let's keep pounding the pace here. So Confessions of an Advertising Man by David Ogilvy. Man, this thing is flagged and highlighted. We could turn to any page here and there's a lesson. This is probably one of the books that I didn't actually go through and pull something out ahead of time just because there's so much stuff. This is probably a good one to do though. Never run an advertisement you would not want your own family to see. I think this kind of comes down to ethics and to really being proud of what you sell. The best ads that I've ever written, I've believed in. If there's a company that approaches me to work with them on marketing or advertising or anything like that, and I don't believe in the product or the service, I don't like it, I don't do it. Now, I'm fortunate in that I'm in a position now where I don't have to. In the past, when I was trying to make enough money to eat, I might have probably taken on a few clients that I possibly didn't believe in as much. But the results suffered. They were never as good. Like, if you can really get behind something and be proud of what you're selling and proud of what you're communicating, your ad's gonna perform better. This is gonna get a little woo-woo, but advertising, marketing, it's a transfer of energy. So if you're passionate about what you're doing, about what you're writing, about what you're selling, it's going to come across. And the same thing is if you doubt yourself, if you think that what you're selling is absolute garbage, that's gonna come across too. So that's an important point. Let's see if we can find one more. This one, I love this one. Any darn fool can put on a price reduction, but it takes brains and perseverance to create a brand. I love that one. So people ask all the time, what do you think about discounts and giveaways and like 20% off and sales and things like that? My view is that unless they're expected in your industry, and in some industries they are expected, you simply can't get away. That is what people expect to see, are sales and discounts and things like that. But if it's not expected and you can find a way to avoid it, that's my recommendation. Because when you provide discounts, you're discounting your value, you're discounting your brand. It's also kind of lazy. Like, can't we think of another way to increase the perceived value, to ramp up the scarcity, the urgency, find some of the other amazing tools that are referenced in all of these books on how we can create better ads without just having to cut the price? Worthy challenge, I think. All right, in this next book, I'm gonna cover a theme that we kind of talked about quickly before, about how we don't create desire, we tap into existing demand. And there's perhaps no more powerful way of saying this than in this book here. This is another classic, Positioning by Al Rice and Jack Trout. There's another book right after this written by them as well. Very powerful stuff. But there's a cool quote in here that says, "The average person will sit still when being told something which he or she knows nothing about. This is why news is an effective advertising approach, because they know nothing and we just tell them a whole bunch of stuff. But the average person cannot tolerate being told he or she is wrong. Mind changing is the road to advertising disaster." This is another reason that in advertising we've got a saying that says you preach to the converted, you preach to the choir, you only talk to people that already believe what you believe. There's no point in going to people who don't believe you, who think you're wrong, and then trying to convince them otherwise. If you've ever had an argument with, I don't know, anyone, and you've tried to convince them that your political party is better, or this belief is better, or that, let me know how that goes, right? Like it's not a winnable fight. So why would we even waste our time and our money trying to do that? We're much better off to find the people that already believe what we do, or to find the people who have no idea about this new world or this new offer or this new solution that we're proposing, and then advertising to them. They're significantly higher to convert. It makes your life significantly easier. That's the reason, I think one of the biggest reasons I've been so successful with my advertising is that I'm very careful and strategic about the campaigns that I choose to take on and the offers that I look at. So one great way to have a really good success rate is to just not take on ones that you know are not going to be winnable, like trying to convince somebody to change their entire political or religious belief system with one simple ad. That's not going to happen. On the other hand, if you can find someone that already has a very strong belief and you can tap into it and show them a newer way, a faster way, a better way, I don't want to say there's no way to lose, but it's a lot easier. All right, next up by the same authors, Al Rice, Jack Trout, we have the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. This one is more of a marketing book than an advertising book, but the concepts, of course, still apply. Now, the lesson here, the technique that you want to understand is another bit of a shot to the advertiser's ego, but it's on the law of success. And it's essentially saying, it's quite a depressing thing. Success often leads to arrogance, and arrogance to failure. This is very true. What often ends up happening, especially if you are, I don't want to say lucky, but might be it. We've all seen the stories of the overnight successes, the get-rich-quick schemes that actually work. The 1 in a million who launches their first ad, makes $1 million overnight, and then they become the poster child, the case study for everybody's program that they're selling. Those are rare instances though, and what often ends up happening is when that happens, it doesn't repeat itself because it starts to sort of affirm dangerous behaviors that existed in the first place. So it was the result of the stars aligning, and these things do happen. However, an almost more dangerous approach is that if you do things right and you put in your time and you put in your effort and you're slow to get results and then you finally do get results, it's almost like this weight gets lifted off your shoulders and you start to feel like, I finally cracked the code. And the reality is that even though all of these fundamentals and all of these principles and all of these foundational concepts we're talking about don't change, the way that they're applied, they do change. So you have to stay relevant. You have to stay informed about whatever advertising method that you're choosing to use, whether it's Facebook ads, Instagram ads, TikTok ads, YouTube ads, direct mail, newspapers, TV, anything like that. Like if that's going to be your medium of choice, you have to stay up to date on where it's going, what it's costing. Are there changing consumer trends? Are there changing CPMs and cost structures? Is there different ways that agencies are working with media buyers versus creators? You've got to make sure that your success doesn't cloud your vision to start thinking that you can do no wrong. Speaking from experience here, back around 10 years ago, when I first sort of got started in advertising, my first few campaigns were horrible. Then I managed to luck out, and one just worked. And I think it was more really dumb luck than any kind of skill or knowledge or experience at the time. And I got a little bit arrogant, thinking I could do no wrong. And I put more of my own money behind it, and I thought this is a definite winner, and I lost everything. Like it just did not work, because it was luck, and it was the right place, the right time, and as soon as that right place and right time ended, things disappeared, and I realized I should probably learn from some of these books. All right, so my next technique and the next strategy that I want to share with you is probably one of the most important of all, which is to write your ad conversationally, to make sure that it's relevant and that it's relatable to your audience. I get a lot of questions, I see a lot of comments that, well, I know a lot about this, and that's not how I talk, and I'm very educated in this field. Doesn't matter. Like, none of that matters. In fact, the smarter you are, almost the harder you're going to have to work to simplify the concepts and to bring it down to a manageable and attainable level for your ad to actually convert. If you start talking and using fancy words, and I've already said this before, but it gets way too highbrow, you're gonna lose people. They're not gonna read, they're gonna read and get confused, they're gonna have to think about it too much, and they're gonna scroll or click away or whatever it is. This book is probably not what you were expecting, but it's actually Jerry Seinfeld's book, Sign Language. I don't know how old this thing is. Many years ago. But what's really interesting is the way that he writes, the way that he structures his sentences, the way that everything kind of flows together. There's short sentences, there's not a lot of commas, there's periods, exclamation points, question marks. It's sentence, then sentence, it's conversational, it's short, it's catchy, it's interesting. It's kind of like a masterclass on how to write ads if you're not really that interested in advertising and you kind of just like jokes. Whether you love Seinfeld or not, it's still a really interesting book. And if you're going to be writing ads and you're looking for a way to make it more relatable and more authentic and more kind of like everyday language, that's a really good place to start. And on that note, another book to take a look at is How to Write Funny. Now, what's interesting about these books is that they're not that funny, because comedy and humor, they're very challenging skills to sort of teach someone, to try to understand. It's kind of one of those things that you know it when you see it, but it's really hard to describe. Well, it causes this reaction in the brain and it makes a laugh and whatever it is. Like, that's not comedy. This book is interesting because it kind of dissects comedy and it dissects how you would write it out in a way that's actually understandable. So the technique and the strategy that I want to encourage, if at all possible, is to find an element of humor and comedy in whatever it is that you're selling. The more B2B, business to business, boring, regulated health, medical, legal, accounting, financial fields, the more kind of dry that your industry is, the greater the opportunity to inject just a little bit of humor. Your audience will absolutely love and appreciate it. They will value it, and a little bit goes a long way. It doesn't have to be an entire ad full of jokes. Just show a little bit of humor, make a slight crack, make a reference that would be interesting to your target market. Find ways to incorporate this, and you can watch the success of your ad go up. In fact, this isn't advertising, but more so for any kind of content. On a YouTube video, if I find that I'm able to add or structure in some kind of element of comedy or humor, even a little joke, even if it's weird, a weird dad joke, whatever it is, the retention of the video goes up. The calls to action, if I make any, increase. Humor goes a long way at showing that you're human and relatable and authentic. It allows people to lower their guard, and therefore they're more receptive to your message. Okay, next book. This one I keep by me all the time. This is actually a Thesaurus. It's my grandmother's old Thesaurus from the 1950s. So it's a bit of it's kind of like half taped together. It's got some sentimental value. I keep it by me. I don't reference it a lot because I've got a Thesaurus on the computer that I use a whole lot more. But it's important to try to find alternate words and synonyms to describe what you're trying to say without saying the same thing again and again. Now, if you're writing, say, SEO copy, this is going to be different. You obviously don't want to keyword stuff your content, but even for an ad, you don't want to say the same thing over and over and over again because people are going to start to go blind to it. So you want to find alternate ways of describing it. You want to find alternate sort of emotional words. You want to find words that convey some kind of visual image in someone's mind. And a thesaurus is powerful for this. All of my clients know that during any meeting, I'm guaranteed going to pull up the thesaurus and look up alternate words for whatever it is that they're selling to try to find things that are like, yeah, that's the one. That's the powerful word. A good example of this is I wrote an ad years ago that did okay. I can't remember the exact stats, but we'll say it was like a, I don't know, $1.50, $2 cost per lead, something average, decent. But then we found a word, and in this case, it wasn't on the Thesaurus, but it shows the power of words, and it was dad bod when that was a thing. And we added that to the ad, and the cost per lead went down to, I think it was around like 49 cents or whatever it was from that one simple term. This is the power of words. This is the importance of understanding the words that resonate or are important to your target market, which ones they understand, which ones they can visualize, which ones convey meaning. The beauty of Dadbot is that it also incorporated that element of humor in it as well. So again, the Thesaurus. Good book to have. All right, so this next tip is going to be relevant to everyone, but the book that I'm going to reference is probably only known to a few of the most, the diehard, the nerdy, the geekiest copywriters, the ones that really live for this stuff. The book here is The Boron Letters by Gary Halbert. This was a book that was written to his son while he was actually in prison. But doesn't take away the fact that there's some pretty interesting letters. The beauty of it is that it was written to his son with pieces of advice about business and life and so on, making money, copywriting, etc. But there's one line in particular that I've kept highlighted and I've referenced over the years, which says, "The money is where the enthusiasm is." Now, I mentioned this before, but it's worth bringing up again here, is that marketing, advertising, communication, persuasion, influence, it's a transfer of energy. The more that you believe in something, the more that you're passionate about it, the better you're going to be able to show someone that this is worth caring about. Again, if you're promoting something that you just don't believe in, you don't even like, you're pretty much dead in the water before you've even started. The other benefit of reading something like the Boron Letters is that it's going to give you insight into how someone writes conversationally, how they write to a friend, how, in this case, his son, but like that's how you want to structure your ads. You don't want them to look formal, overly polished, too corporate. They'll fail before they even get sent. You want it to look like a lot of the styles that's going on in that book. All right, so the next technique that I want to share with you is a slightly more advanced concept, but it's from one of my all-time favorite marketers. We've already referenced one of his books, being Purple Cow. This is All Marketers Tell Stories, and you can see All Marketers Are Liars is crossed out there as part of the book's marketing, by Seth Godin. Again, just absolutely packed with gems. You can see I've just got it flagged here. I should just highlight the whole book. But there's one part in particular that I think is incredibly useful to you as an advertiser, which is essentially that people aren't going to believe you, right? Like, you're going to make a claim, you're going to say something, and they're going to naturally look at you with skepticism and cynicism. And this has to do with your profession, it has to do with the medium being advertising, and it also has to do with the fact that they've probably been burned before by other less scrupulous, less ethical marketers. So this is the quote that I want to read. "If a consumer figures something out or discovers it on her own, she's 1,000 times more likely to believe it than if it's just something you claim." This is where the art of marketing occurs. So essentially, our goal with advertising isn't to make claims, isn't to say this. It's to almost prove a compelling case, kind of like a lawyer in a courtroom going over the facts, allowing them to come to their own logical and natural conclusion that your offer is the best solution for the problem that they have. Now I appreciate that's a deep concept, and it's also probably one of the more complicated and certainly more advanced techniques that I'm going to suggest here. But it's really powerful. If you can find a way to structure your ad so that the natural conclusion, by allowing them to realize this on their own, that yours is best, you just watch your conversion rates soar. Okay, so next, we've got all this stuff, we've written some copy, we've taken these, we've applied them into our ads. Well, how do you know what's working and what's not? Because the reality is it doesn't matter how many ads you make, some of them are going to perform better and some of them are going to perform significantly worse, which is why I love this book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall. Essentially, 80/20 is the Pareto's principle. Perry has done an amazing job of making that marketing and advertising specific, essentially lining out, if you have all of these ad campaigns, these ones are going to deliver this kind of results, these ones will deliver this, you'll make a lot of money here, you'll lose money here. Very important in order to make sure that your advertising campaigns stay accountable and stay profitable. One of the best ways, one of the fastest ways to improve your return on investment from your advertising is to simply cut your losing ads. Simply stop spending money on things that aren't working and you'll make more money because you won't be losing as much money. It sounds very simple, but it's a profound concept. So if you haven't read this book yet, highly recommend it. I mean, again, there's just such value in here through essentially tips on how to structure and how to optimize and how to improve the overall effectiveness of your advertising campaigns. If you're running any significant amount of money and you haven't read it, you gotta go do that now. All right, next up, let's drag some of these piles ahead here. And we'll keep rocking and rolling. Next one is Hitmakers by Derek Thompson. This one's really interesting because it goes over essentially what makes something successful. Why does something become a hit? What are the elements to it? And can you engineer virality? Can you bake this in? Can you get attention in an age of distraction, as he essentially promises? There's a lot of good stuff in here as well. I've got all kinds of different pages flagged. However, building on our last point of 80-20 sales and marketing, I want to talk about it here because he says that when they studied all of these different things, they found that 90% of revenues come from 10% of book sales. In digital marketing, 60% of an app store revenues come from just 0.005% of companies. Basically, the vast majority of everything you do is a failure. What a depressing turn of events. But by going into things that way, by understanding and keeping ego in check, and by understanding that most of the bets you're going to make are going to fail, it changes your perspective on advertising. So for me, knowing that if I say create 10 ads, 20% of them, let's say 2 out of 10 are gonna be just absolutely amazing, 6 are gonna do okay, and 20% are just gonna be absolute bombs, it allows me to track things and to be very vigilant about the decisions that I make. So I'm aware ahead of time going into it, some of these are not going to work. So I need to be strategic and accountable, making the decision of when I'm going to cut them off, when I'm going to allocate more spend to them, when I'm going to stop spending, what's my maxed cost per acquisition that I'm willing to spend in order to make this sale, where are my metrics going to guide me in the right direction. I look at diagnostic metrics, things that help me make the right decision, things like my CPM, cost per impression, my CPC, cost per click, my CTR, my click-through rate, and then I also look at my main metrics, my purchases, my cost per acquisition or sale, my ROI, and things like that. But I know going into a campaign what I'm willing to spend, and then it takes emotions out of it and it allows me to make more logical decisions, knowing full well that many of the things I do are not going to work, but those few that do more than make up for it. Okay, next up, another technique to really elevate your ads. We've talked about this quickly when we talked about stories, but next I wanted to give you a practical example of how to structure the stories within your ads and what actually makes up a story. So this is Stories That Stick by Kindra Hall. It's a great book. However, there's the section in here that I really want to draw your attention to, which are the components of what makes a great story. And she says there's 4 components of a great story, and you can include these in your ads. Number 1 is an identifiable character or identifiable characters, who they are, what they do, etc. Number 2, authentic emotion. We can't fake this. We've got to find a way that there's something that people actually care about. Why are we in this? Is it happy? Is it sad? Whatever. Number 3, a significant moment. Something has to happen. If nothing happens, not really a story. And then number 4, specific details. So can we be clear? Can we be concrete, concise? Can we use metaphors, visual language, imagery, things like that to sort of, again, help to establish the story, but also make it more powerful and more convincing. So use those 4 different things in your ads and you have a story. Okay, next up is all about how to be more persuasive. And essentially, let's take it down to the very beginning of the ad, which is all about attention. Now, great book here called Persuasion. And again, like most of them, it's loaded with all kinds of different things. However, the point that I want to bring to your attention here is no attention equals no communication equals no result. You have to get someone's attention, but then you have to keep their attention. Now, this is perhaps what makes YouTube and an online video such an interesting source, is that you're able to track retention. You're able to track where people go back and rewatch things. You're able to track where they speed up. You're able to track where people leave and drop off. And you can go back and you can analyze where these things happen. Many of the online video platforms allow you to do this as well. So if you create an ad like that, you're going to be able to see where you're losing people and what kind of pattern interrupt can you add. Can you add a visual element? Can you add an auditory element? Can you add some kind of word? If it's a text-based ad, can you break it up with different formatting? It's important that you keep someone's attention because otherwise it doesn't matter what you say or how good whatever it is that you're selling is. It's not going to matter because they're not paying attention. All right, so the next book is a little bit less of an advertising book, more of a self-help classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. great book for an advertiser to read. It's about empathy. It's about understanding. It's about being less arrogant and egotistical. It's about caring more about other people. It's about putting their needs first. It's about listening and not just hearing. It's about really trying to identify where they're coming from and their pains and problems and frustrations. It's good. The fact is that when your advertising becomes more about you and less about your prospect, all hope is lost. People are, what's the nice way of saying this? They're relatively selfish in a way that they only really care about themselves first, and then they can care about other people after. But we've all met that person, and clearly you know that they're just in it for themselves. They know that they're number one to them, and that's all that matters, and they'll happily put themselves first. We don't like that person. That's not a fun person to be around. You don't want to be that person, and you don't want your ad to look like it's that person either, that's just trying to take as much as you possibly can. This book helps to sort of set your frame right to one of providing value, one of trying to be empathetic and understanding and really getting on the side of your customer and of your client and of your prospect so you can help them achieve what they want. I'm running out of space to stack things. Put it there and move on. Okay, next up is an important lesson on influence and on status specifically, and on understanding your target market, and also not writing off different elements of the target market or writing off certain products or offers because you think they're unattainable or you won't be able to do it appropriately. The point is that for every product and service, there's a market out there, and for every market, there's a sufficient amount of products or services that they would benefit from. And there's ways to tap into all of them. Now, here's the book, Invisible Influence. I wonder if you're gonna be able to see this nifty hologram that's on the title that shifts as I rotate it in the light. It goes invisible. But the point is there's a really nifty story in here about the $300,000 watch that doesn't tell time. And essentially there was a watchmaker that made a watch that cost 300 grand and it literally did not tell time. All it really did was tell you if it was nighttime or daytime. That's it, but it sold. Why did it sell? Because to the person that bought it, there was a following, there was status associated with it, there was a rise in their perceived value and their worth. Whatever the reasons, they managed to tap into it through branding, through positioning, and by clearly communicating the benefits. Now, the benefits are not like what you and I would think of when it comes to a $300,000 watch that doesn't tell time. But to that market, it was clearly valuable. And that's the key, really. It's an understanding what are the benefits that your market is after, and how can you communicate and put your best foot forward for why this is going to be helpful and beneficial. So in the case of this $300,000 watch that doesn't tell time, it sounds like a significant disadvantage, but that was actually the unique selling proposition, the USP. That was the advantage of it. It allowed you to simply know if it's day or night. And I don't know, I guess if your house doesn't even have windows, you can't even look outside. Now you know. All right, next up, we've got PreSuasion by Robert Cialdini. Robert Cialdini, if you're not already familiar, wrote one of the most popular, influential books on marketing called Influence, about different factors like scarcity and reciprocity and all of these other valuable tools we use all the time. PreSuasion's interesting though, because it allows you to set the frame for what's about to happen. So essentially, instead of showing one person in your ad, which would convey an image of independence and singularity, well, you could show a group of people, which would show community and make it more likely that that would foster that kind of emotion. The story in here that I absolutely love is about the salesman who goes to do a house call, and he gets into the house and they're having a chat and he says, "Oh, I forgot the papers in my car. Can I just run out and grab them and I'll let myself back in?" And the homeowner says, "Yeah, no problem." He runs out, grabs the papers, comes back in, and he closes the deal. Why is that the case? Well, the reality is that by leaving and by coming in and by being allowed to open their front door and let himself in without them having to greet him and walk him through, that conveys this automatic attitude of trust. After all, we don't just let random people let themselves into our house. Clearly, we're going to trust people, and that subconscious connection happens instantly. There's other stories like this as well that you're able to sort of leverage, and when you understand these powerful, powerful triggers, not only are you going to be able to use them to create better and more compelling advertising and sales copy and sales pages and so on, but probably more interestingly, you're going to start to see them all around you and happening to you in everyday life. Now, some of these are going to happen to you sort of intentionally by a salesperson or a marketer doing these things with forethought, with thinking them through. A lot of them are going to happen unintentionally through friends, through family that have no idea that these exist, but they're just kind of natural ways that we as humans act when we're trying to be influential or persuasive. So very powerful stuff about the brain and about how to leverage it and tap into natural human emotions. All right, next up, as a couple lessons kind of rolled into one from another really great and relatively older book as well, Zig Ziglar's Secrets of Closing the Sale. Now, what's interesting about sales and marketing when it comes to advertising is that sales is typically thought of as like one-to-one. So we're having a sales conversation and you're selling to me or I'm selling to you, whatever it is. But with advertising, with marketing, it's one-to-many, which means that we don't get to hear the objections. We don't get to see the facial expressions. We don't get to read the room and decide whether this is good or not. So we have to do a lot of the thinking ahead of time and really make sure that we're being clear in what we're trying to do. So this book has a lot of good stuff on sales and on how to do it sort of ethically and persuasively, but there's a couple cool sections here that I want to highlight real quick. Selling as a transference of feeling. Now, we've talked about this a lot, so we don't need to beat it up, but you'll notice this theme keeps coming up again and again about advertising and marketing being this transference of energy and of feeling, essentially communicating your belief in the value that you have to offer. But next, to differentiate between sympathy and empathy and to help you think as a buyer and as a seller. Sympathy is kind of when you're like, oh, I feel bad for you and this and that, and you're sympathetic to someone's situations. Empathy is when you try to put yourself in their position and you try to visualize it and you're on the same team. That's what this advertising game is about. It's about being empathetic. It's about helping your prospect make the best decision for them. I've always believed that if you have a good product or a good service and a good offer, you don't just have an opportunity to sell, you have an obligation because you've got something that can help someone solve a problem. So again, we're going to communicate that with good energy. We're going to be empathetic to their needs, and people can tell when they read an ad who they're really looking after. Are you looking after yourself as the advertiser? Or are you looking after the prospect and the customer and the person reading that ad? All right, next up is a technique on sort of associations and context. There's a great book. They talk about this in a lot of different books as well, but Blind Sight, essentially how marketing influences and shapes our brains. It's good to know this from a consumer point of view as well. But one of the most famous studies, and they've done this in a number of different contexts, is putting people in different white lab coats. Sometimes they were given the same white lab coat and told that these people were doctors. Sometimes they were given the white lab coat and told that the people were painters or just random workers. And the way that people perceived these individuals significantly changed. Not only that, but the people that were told that they were now wearing a doctor's coat versus a painter's coat or whatever, their attitudes and beliefs and all that changed as well. But from the context of advertising, this is important because it allows us to leverage other cues and other triggers in our environment. So are we trying to convey an image of authority? Well, then let's use authoritative colors and authoritative branding. Let's use lab coats or pilot uniforms or very bold and corporate looking font. Are we trying to convey an image of fun and whimsy and carefree attitudes? Then we need to use the corresponding colors there and the corresponding images. It's very important that the message that we're delivering is contextual to the offer that we're trying to sell and that all of the pieces line up. We can't have things that are mismatched because they're going to create some kind of incongruence in your viewers' brains. And when they see that, they'll just back away and back out. So again, a lot of nifty mental stuff here, but the big takeaway there is to make sure that your ad and your messaging and everything that you're doing is congruent with the offer and with the market you're trying to serve. All right, we're gonna get a little bit deeper here. So I'm gonna give you a bit of a warning here. I know that you're a kind, caring, and ethical person, so I have no problem sharing these following recommendations with you. But just be warned that these can be used for evil, and they have been used for evil in the past by dictators and by scam artists and by all kinds of unethical people. So we want to make sure that we're using these things in the best way possible. That said, they do come with some relatively controversial titles, including this one, The Art of Manipulation, which sounds evil and like nothing you want to do. However, it's important to understand how people use this against you, and then the concepts and the underlying principles so that you can apply it in your advertising in order to better help and better serve people. There's a lot of stuff in this one. The big one though here is on validation, social proof, and essentially status. Like again, if we think back to that $300,000 watch and the status increase that the guy's getting from a watch that doesn't tell time, we do a lot of things as human beings for an increase in status. But status is contextual to your market. For example, if I drop my kid off to school in a Lamborghini, that lowers my status. because nobody really wants to see me driving a Lamborghini to drop my kid off at school, and they're gonna judge me and think worse, and it's just not the right place. Internet marketing convention, on the other hand, that'd be fine. If I show up to drive my kid to school in a minivan, nice new clean minivan, my status increases because now I'm a responsible parent and I'm putting my kid first and all of those other things. If I show up to an internet marketing conference or whatever in a minivan, well, my status will be neutral at best, maybe diminished. What's with the car or whatever it is. So it's very context specific. The point is, though, is that most of the decisions that people make are factoring this into their overall equation. Is this going to increase my status or decrease my status? So make very sure that whatever you're doing is never going to decrease someone's status. The second that you sell something that would be perceived as decreasing their status, they will not buy. They will back away faster than you could ever imagine. On the topic of people and status, let's look at this one next, which is called Brainfluence. This is another one that's loaded with sort of those psychological phenomenon that we can implement and incorporate into our advertising. The section that I want to draw your attention to here is compare people, not products. Again, if you think about the underlying drives to increase someone's status, well, we all have these identities. So do your customers. These visions of ourselves that we hold to be true, and we don't like things that challenge them or disagree with them, just like we're never want to say that someone's wrong. It's an immediate way to lose the sale. The best example here is to take a look at what they present as kind of that Microsoft versus Apple. If you remember the Mac versus PC debate, the kind of nerdy, buttoned up corporate guy versus the young, cool Mac using guy, they rarely compare specs and features and speeds. In fact, I can't remember if they ever do, but they always compare the attitude, the identity, the personality, and what they're trying to do is increase the status of the user of that product. So what they're doing is they're comparing the kind of person that does this versus the kind of person that does that. Same thing happens with Coke versus Pepsi, two other massive brands. Coca-Cola being that classic, endearing, long-lasting, traditional brand that has a lot of nostalgia, and Pepsi being for the new generation, being younger and hipper and cooler, whatever it is. Very different positions serving for very different segments of the market rather than the product. It's not like Pepsi comes out and says, we taste better, even though if you remember the Pepsi taste tests from, man, many years ago. Point is, you want to compare the people and the identities, and you want to represent and try to increase the status by identifying with the beneficial characteristics of that group that you want to appeal to. And on the topic, while we carry on with these persuasive psychological phenomena, this is another amazing book. This is one that I might unpack further in another video because it's literally just riddled with all kinds of different psychological cues and how to implement them and incorporate them into your marketing and into your advertising. Perhaps the most important one is anchoring. This is one that's valuable no matter what kind of marketing or sales or advertising you're doing. Anchoring is essentially the psychological phenomenon where the first number, the first name, the first thing that you say forms the basis from which all other things are mentioned. There's a reason that depending on different sales pages that I've made over the years, when I introduce price, I often lead it by saying this is not $1 million, or this isn't going to cost you $100 million, or this isn't going to even cost you $100,000, because what I'm doing is I'm anchoring the price at something that's incredibly high so that when I do present the price, it seems like a bargain in comparison. The flip side of that, and the way to totally mess this up, is to be like, this is going to cost you more than 50 cents or more than $1, because that becomes the anchor. And then every price that you say after that is going to seem higher, unless you're selling a pack of gum or whatever it is. So be very cautious of the first numbers that you introduce when you're talking about advertising. All right, next up is an advertising technique that I absolutely love. I use all the time, and it's called priming. And essentially what it has to do is introducing a new concept or making your prospect, your reader, more open and more interested and more likely to accept what you have to say. Now, this is from a book on methods of persuasion. This is a really good book as well. I've said that about every book here, but this one's fascinating because in it, he gives a good example, which I've gone on to tell about the time where I was offered a dish of eggplant, and we were out at a restaurant, and a friend of mine was like, hey, you should really try this dish. It's got eggplant. And I was like, I hate eggplant. It's the worst thing ever. And they're like, no, you'll love it. You should totally try it. And so I tried it. I actually really liked it, and it turned out to be one of my favorite dishes. Now every time we go back to the restaurant, I order that exact same eggplant dish. Now, it seems like a relatively trivial, non-important story. However, what I've just done there is I've told the story of a time that I was open-minded, I was more adventurous, I was more willing to try something, And I was also willing to change my mind, and in the end, I benefited from it. All of these traits then make your prospect far more likely to sort of adopt those same things. Robert Cialdini talks about this a lot in Influence and that, about sort of setting the tone and about setting stories of like, do you consider yourself an open or a caring person, and then asking for something after as a follow-up after they've said, yes, of course, I'm open, and so on. So again, very powerful tools. But priming, simply telling things that are relevant to the attitudes or the actions that you want someone to take, very useful, and you can do it very quickly in the early part of your advertising. That'll set the tone, and when you combine priming and anchoring and some of the other psychological techniques, you'll start to see why some advertisers have a clear advantage over others when it comes to creating very profitable campaigns. All right, another technique that you absolutely have to incorporate into your advertising, or I guess two, are believability and relatability. There's some sections on that in this book, Mass Persuasion Method. Talks about a couple different psychological tactics, but believability and relatability are very important. So number one is whenever you make a claim in your ads, you've got to find a way to back that up. And you have to understand that your prospect, your reader, is already cynical and jaded. They've been burned before. They don't want to believe you. So you got to give them a reason to. And the second thing is you have to try to be relatable. Now, this is one of the big reasons that we avoid big words. We avoid fancy sayings. We avoid complicating things unnecessarily, but we also try to make sure that we're relatable to our target market. So for example, if you're doing a video sales letter and you're in the video and you're serving a certain kind of market, you would be wise to dress like they dress rather than dress like someone that has no idea what they do or who they do. And that's going to vary depending on if you're serving doctors or lawyers or entrepreneurs or salespeople or mechanics or whatever it is. But you have to show that you live in their world. You watch the same shows they watch. You eat the same foods. You know the same places. You have all of the same characteristics. You're just like them. You're just a little bit ahead, and you've got some secret knowledge that they don't have yet, but you're willing to share it with them. The second that you become unrelatable or holier than thou or put yourself on a pedestal, all hope is lost. Your ad's completely gone. All right, the next book is another one that not a lot of people know about. This one's a bit thinner and slightly more expensive when compared to, say, the other ones available on Amazon. This one's the 16-word sales letter, and it's really fascinating. It's got a whole bunch of different psychological techniques as well, but the main point that I want you to take away from this one is that for someone to buy, they need to believe that there's this magical solution and you're the only place that they can get it. So you need to obviously identify that they have a problem. You need to identify that there is a solution available. You need to prove that it's going to work, etc., etc. But the key thing is in really making sure that the only place to get this ideal solution is through you. Now, we would call this some kind of intellectual property. We would give it a signature name system. We can brand it accordingly, but it's very important that you do have this all wrapped up in a way that makes it not a commodity. So if you clean cars, well, you don't just clean cars, you provide this system. And if you have a coaching program, well, it's not just coaching, it's life transformation, etc., through this thing and whatever, because then it's only available through you. That's the big point. But again, this is a very quick read, so it's a nice, easy one to kind of get through. And I keep going back to it again and again to make sure that I'm staying on track and my ads don't become generic or commodity-like. All right, and now we've got possibly my favorite advertising book of all time. This is Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz. Used to be able to pick up like a used copy for a few $100. They're back in publication, I believe, through Brian Kurtz. You have to do a quick search on where to get it, but it's probably still around $100 or so, but it's a very valuable and interesting book written many decades ago by Gene Schwartz himself. This thing is loaded with value. There's so many things in here that, again, we could make an entire video on it, but there's a couple points that I want to make. The first of which is Eugene Schwartz was one of the first to really clarify the fact that we're not creating demand, we're tapping into it. There's no point in swimming upstream when we have all of this demand that's unmet that we can simply align our product or service with and tap into and benefit from. So that's an incredibly important piece. The next thing is that he's got a system called levels of awareness that your prospect is at. So are they unaware of anything? They don't even know they have a problem. Are they aware that they have a problem, but they don't know about solutions? Are they aware there are solutions, but they don't know which one is best? Do they know which one's best and they're just looking for details on how to go buy it? but all of these are going to influence how you write your ad and which sort of words and promises you're going to make depending on the levels of awareness that your client or prospect is at. For example, if you're selling something for weight loss and someone is completely oblivious to the fact that they're overweight, well, you're not going to offer something that's a weight loss cure and here's all the details because they don't even know they have a problem. On the other hand, if they're further down this awareness spectrum and they know they have a problem, they know their solutions, they're comparing solutions, well, now you could start to look at, well, here's why this solution is better than that solution, or this one is better than that one. Now you're providing direct comparisons, which again shows up further down the line. There's a lot more to be said about this, so tons of valuable information in it, but for even more help, for even more tips on advertising and for strategies that'll really help you take everything we've talked about and put it into practice, I've linked up a video right here with some of my best marketing strategies. So make sure to check that out now, and I'll see you in the next video. The 40-40-20 rule shows the breakdown of the three main elements that are responsible for your ad success. 40% to your market, 40% to your offer, and 20% to your copy.